and we're in Isaiah 24 to 27. And did you guys read over it? Uh,
Yes.
I see one nod. I hear a yes. Okay, a couple people read over it at least. Um, so, any thoughts about it before we start talking about it? Since you just read over it, did you see anything that you hadn't
Uh,
seen before?
I've seen it's a lot. It's very strong. It's hard to swallow, you know.
Hmm.
It's a very strong. The words are very strong. That's
Hmm.
how it affected me. It's just like wow. There's just it's can't find other words. It's just overpowering.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So we were still working through kind of my introductory comments on it, or on this on the whole section and on the book of Isaiah itself. So we're looking at now the main sections of Isaiah 24 to 27, which is on the handout on page 5. And so this is 24 to 27 is the section that we're looking at as a whole here. And so this is how I've kind of outlined it. The first chapter, I just basically kept the chapter divisions. The first chapter is judgment on the earth or the land. Let me say something about that word that translated earth in the section 24 to 27. That land is Eretz. It appears 23 times in chapters 24 to 27, and you'll have some Bibles that will have a footnote right after the first use of earth in this section, like in the ESV. There's a footnote, and it says also could be translated land, could be translated land. And in fact, in the Bible, land is probably the most common way this is translated. And in the majority of those times, it refers to the promised land or the land of Israel. And so it's a word that is used for earth, the entire world. And it's a word that's used for land. And this raises the first in a series of interpretive questions about how do we understand it in Isaiah 24 to 27. And I think that it goes back and forth between referring to the land of, say, Judah with Jerusalem, or you might say Israel or the Promised Land, and referring to the world. And so, I when we get into the actual chapter 24, I think that is mostly about the coming judgment on Judah, and land is or Eretz is being used there as land. Um, and some translations say it like that, but most modern translations go for earth there. So anyway, chapter 24, judgment on the earth or the land. Chapter 25 is a song of praise to God for his faithfulness in judgment and salvation. So this is looking forward to the deliverance from the enemies. In later parts of this section, God is going to judge the enemies of God's people, and he's going to restore them to the land. And this is praise for that in chapter 25, but it's looking forward to that being accomplished. And it talks about the blessedness of the hope of those who hope in the Lord and wait for him. In chapter 26, it's about the strong city of God. I think last time we were together, I mentioned that the city as a metaphor is used in a couple of different ways. And I have a little table about that further on down in the outline that we'll look at when we get there. But chapter 26 is about the strong city of God. And this is about the cleansing of idolatry, in fact, the removal of all idolatry from God's people, and the future resurrection of his people, and his present protection of them while they wait for his time of judgment, or wait out his time of judgment. And there's a link, obviously, between 25 and 26 because 25, the praise to God, is celebrating the things that are then prophesied in chapter 26. In chapter 27,
Excuse me.
yeah, Catherine.
When you first asked that question, did any of us read and so forth? And I answered yes. Being
Hmm.
absent last week, I'm afraid I missed the fact that you were looking for an answer in regard to chapters 24 to 27, and I only had studied chapter 24. So
Oh,
my
okay.
answer I'm sure, would be a lot different from what I've said. My answer was isolated only in what I read in chapter 24, and I needed you to understand that about my answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think your answer
You're welcome.
equally applies to the other chapters as well. But
Okay.
well, since you brought that up, I'll just mention again that I think it would be really helpful that if you just put it into your regular reading while we're in this section of Isaiah, that you would at least once a week sit down and read through all of those chapters 24 through 27 in one sitting, which,
Okay.
is not really a big ask. It's like 20 minutes,
No,
but,
no.
you know, so
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. And then chapter 27, God's people are delivered, the nation's defeated. So this is in response to 26, which is a prophecy of that. This is now 27 is also in prophetic and also in praise genre. God's people delivered, the nations defeated. The promise of the vineyard, I don't know if you remember that, all the way back in chapter 5, God called his people a vineyard that he had planted and they yielded bad fruit. And what was he going to do with them? Well, he's going to tear it down. Well,
Yeah.
here's a new vineyard now in chapter 27. It's a vineyard that's fruitful, that the Lord that has no enemies, there aren't even thorns. That the Lord is so thoroughly cleansed in his people. Um, Chapter 27 also includes the great ingathering from the nations and worship on the holy mountain. So the section starts in judgment and goes through to the Lord being supreme on the holy mountain, the enemies uh, gathered, either defeated or gathered into the kingdom, and God's people being cleansed of their idolatry and worshiping him. So there's this movement here going on. And when I read through it again last night and then again this morning, I thought uh, that I could discern just really simple, uh, four really easy subjects that are easy to remember. There are, of course, a couple other subjects in here, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But four really easy ways to understand what's going on. Um, and these don't correspond to the chapter numbers. This is just the things that are happening. And as I said, Isaiah goes back and forth. He's recursive in his writing. Um, so that also means it goes between present and future. He's doing that too. So there's judgment on God's people. You remember that in Isaiah's time, the Judah is still around. Israel has disappeared. Samaria has been overcome by the Assyrians, but Judah is still around. And Isaiah has been sent to prophesy to the Judean people that God is going to send final conclusive judgment on them, which scatters them to the nations, destroys Jerusalem and the temple, and sends them into exile. And that's the judgment on God's people that these chapters are talking about. So there's judgment on God's people. And then another subject, there's judgment on the nations. So God sends his people into the nations where they endure a time of being away from the land and away from God, time of trial, suffering, and you might call it tribulation. That's the way Isaiah is going to look at it. So they go into the nations for this period, and then so God judges his people, and then second main subject is the judgment of the nations, and coincidental with that, what coincides with it, is the salvation or the rescue of his people and the restoration to the land. So the judgment of the nations includes that. And when there's praise for the judgment on the nations, it's not just, oh, good, you got those bad guys. It's you did what you said. You brought us out of the world and you brought us back to the land and you restored us. So two subjects, judgment of God's people and judgment of the nations, which includes the salvation of God's people. So judgment of God's people, salvation of God's people, judgment of the nations. You can guess what the next one is, salvation of the nations. And all of this results in praise to the Lord for the fulfillment of his word. So 4 or 5 things, depending on how you parse that out, right? So judgment, God's people, salvation, judgment, nations, salvation, praise. Those are the really main big topics that are being talked about there. what's the setting? Is the setting, in our future, is this something like, is this a judgment on the entire world, or is it really contained mostly to those topics that I just talked about, which would be, in one sense, some of those are already done. God's people, Jerusalem was already judged. They already were scattered. They already were restored. But God is right now still gathering his people from the nations, and he will gather his people, Israel,
Mm.
also. And there will be, the glory of the Lord will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea, says Isaiah 11. And so we have past past events, we have ongoing events right now. Is this in any way related to, are these chapters in any way to be read as a description of, the final end times and, um, judgment on the world? I don't think so. As I said the last time, I think there are similarities between
Mhm.
the judgments described here and the judgment at the end of history, but because they're judgments, they're described in similar language. And so
Mhm.
that's what I would say there. Um, if you look real quick at Isaiah 27 verse 8, Isaiah 27 verse 8, so the last chapter in this section, verse 8. Actually, we can look at 7 because 8 is kind of an explanation of the question in 7. 7 says, has the Lord struck her, meaning his people, Israel? Has the Lord struck Israel as he struck down those who struck her? Well, the answer is no. He did strike Israel. He judged them. There is judgment, of Israel, but has she been killed as those were killed who killed her? The answer to these questions are meant to get a negative answer, right? It's meant to get God's people to look at, God has done these things for our restoration. He punished us, but he didn't wipe us out. He left a remnant, etc. Like that. Verse 8, by warfare and exile, you contend with her. That is, now Isaiah is answering on behalf of the people and talking about God. By warfare, God, in exile, you contend with Israel. With his fierce blast, he drives her out as on the day of the east wind blows. And then it talks about the atonement of Jacob. God's going to take away their idols. So the point is that, at least the point for this setting, is that the setting here is God is predicting the exile and the return. That's what this whole preceding 3 chapters have been about. He's been describing judgment and salvation, and then now he's going to sum it up and say, look, I sent you into exile and I brought you back. And that is different than what I did with the nations. I destroy them and they're gone. I saved some people out of them, but they never return to their uh, land. It's because you are my people. So the setting then is to be understood as talking about the exile as a central thing that's coming, and that's the point of a lot of the actually, that is the referent in all of the judgment, or most of the judgment language when we're referring to God's people. It's the exile. So, yeah, in the outline, I have a paragraph. In my opinion, this entire section is primarily about the entire section, being chapters 24 to 27, is primarily about the release from exile and the return to Zion. But the exile and that return are portents of the gathering and the restoration of God's people that will be accomplished and is being accomplished by Jesus. And also the joy associated with the return and the continual celebration of the Lord's presence in Zion are again pictures of the joy and celebration of God's presence in the heavenly kingdom, which we enjoy even now in a small measure. So I think that's important to understand what the setting is and what's going on there. I have a miscellaneous note that the covenant name of God, Yahweh, Lord, all capitals, is used 28 times in this section. There are 69 verses. You can figure it out. It shows up a lot. You know, it's and what's the significance? Well, the significance is the thing that God is praised for is that He has done what He said He would do. He has fulfilled His promises, and so the covenant name of God always reminds us that God is faithful, and this is how it's being used here. I have on the outline thought for thought, thought by thought, um, mini outline. Not that many. It's got 48 something, 48 different lines on it. But I'm not going to really go through it a lot right now. I'll leave that to you to look at, but it's helpful to look at that. But I will look at the bottom of that section where I have summarized it. So again, I say all of Isaiah 24 to 27 is about the coming judgment and its effects, comprising 7 subjects. So now this is a little bit of an expansion on what I said before about 4 subjects. So the coming exile is the first subject, and that culminates the judgment on God's people, previously announced by Moses and Isaiah. So God announces this coming judgment of exile in Moses and then repeats it in Isaiah. And that's what's a main subject here. And then there's the announced judgment on the nations. That's a main subject, the defeat of the enemies, including all false gods, the cleansing from idolatry. The centerpiece is the installment of the Lord as King of the earth in Zion. The other 3 subjects are the deliverance from exile and the return to the land, the calling of the nations, and the glorification of the Lord by His enlarged people on the mountain of the Lord. I say enlarged people because the section contains a couple of verses using that language, but also the section highlights that the nations are going to come in. And so it's not just the returnees who came back, who form part of God's kingdom or form the totality of God's kingdom, but the nations themselves form part of God's kingdom. So this is kind of the storyline, what's happening here. So any questions about any of that or any comments on any of that?
No.
Okay. It sounds clear, right? Makes sense.
Yeah.
And since you've all looked at these passages before, I hope you can see that maybe what's going on in there. You can see some resemblance of what I said with the passage. So, all right, so let's look at Isaiah 24. Then we'll just start at the beginning, and I'm going to read chapter 24. Behold, the Lord will empty the earth. And again, the ESV has a footnote there saying this is also translated land. Could be either one. Behold, the Lord will empty the earth and make it desolate. And He will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. The earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers, the highest people of the earth languish. The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. The wine mourns, the vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh, the mirth of the tambourines is stilled, the noise of the jubilant has ceased, the mirth of the lyre is stilled. No more do they drink wine with singing, strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. The wasted city is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none can enter. There's an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. All joy has grown dark, the gladness of the earth is banished. Desolation is left in the city. The gates are battered into ruins. For thus it shall be in the midst of the earth among the nations. as when an olive tree is beaten, as at the gleaning, when the grape harvest is done. They lift up their voices, they sing for joy over the majesty of the Lord, they shout from the west. Therefore in the east give glory to the Lord, in the coastlands of the sea give glory to the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. From the ends of the earth we hear songs of praise, of glory to the righteous one. But I say, I waste away, I waste away. Woe is me, for the traitors have betrayed. With betrayal, the traitors have betrayed. Terror and pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth. He who flees at the sound of the terror shall fall into the pit, and he who climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare. For the windows of heaven are opened, and the foundations of the earth tremble. The earth is utterly broken. The earth is split apart. The earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunken man. It sways like a hut. Its transgression lies heavy upon it, and it falls, and will not rise again. On that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and the kings of earth on the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners in the pit. They will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded, and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. Amen. So that has implicitly all of the themes that I mentioned earlier. Either, whether you're looking at the list of 4 or the list of 7, it's got all of them there. They are difficult to see. It's difficult to follow what's going on because it does move back and forth between what is the most immediate, basically the present threat of soon and coming judgment, moves between that and praise for the accomplishment of all of God's things, which include the defeat of the enemy, the restoration from exile, the cleansing from idolatry. All of those things are included in that. So the first question, as I said, is, are we talking about verse 1, behold, the Lord will empty the earth, make it desolate. Are we talking about the land of Israel? Are we talking about, is this exile language? I think it is, for a couple of reasons. First, it makes sense in the context. Secondly, he uses in verse 1 again, he will make it desolate, he will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. If it's the whole world, where are you going to scatter them to? This is actually covenant language, right? It's covenant curse language. I will empty the land and scatter you to the nations. That's covenant curse language. And the reason for the judgment is given in verse 4 and 5, right? Verse 5 in particular. The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Now, there are 2 options for that everlasting covenant. One of them is the covenant with Noah, which had no laws to violate. And the other one is the covenant with Abraham, and which is then developed with Moses, etc. And that covenant has laws and actually includes language in the curses about if you defile the land, I will scatter you, right? And starts out with the earth lies defiled as they've transgressed this covenant. Verse 6, therefore a curse devours the earth. And so this sounds very much like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and things using the same language and the same punishment. So I think in this very first section, what we're talking about is Isaiah is repeating the Lord's threat to judge and exile his people because of their sin. And that when you get to the part in this where Isaiah says, woe is me, right? Where he says, where is that exactly? That is after the praise. It says verse 16, right? Middle of 16, Isaiah speaks about all of this. What's just happened is there's been an announcement of judgment, then there's been praise for God fulfilling his word. And this praise comes from the ends of the earth. well, that's where the people had been scattered. They'd been scattered to the ends of the earth, and now God judges the enemies and restores them from the ends of the earth, and they're all praising him for that. Um, and Isaiah says, I waste away, woe is me. And he goes on to say something about traitors betraying. And after that, verse 17 and 18, terror and pit and snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth. This is why he's wasting away, why he's upset. He's like, yeah, it's going to be glorious in the future, but right now you're going to get judged. Right now you're going to get judged. I see it coming. It's right there, and it's going to be terrifying. And you're going to have to go through this terrible period of judgment and tribulation, and then the Lord will judge his enemies and deliver you, like he said, and there will be praise. But this process is decreed by the Lord and necessary for your salvation. And it's so he's looking at it, and we've seen Isaiah do this before in other parts of the book where he sees the coming judgment and his heart breaks, for the people. So even though there's joy that the Lord will be honored and he will reign, there is anguish for the generation that Isaiah lives in, saying this is, coming, this judgment. So I think what's going on, or the referent for Earth is, I think it's conclusive to me at least, that what we're talking about is the land of Israel in this first part, that it's, uh, but as I said, there are differences of opinion on that, and it appears to move in other parts of chapters 24 to 27 to be talking about the entire world, because the word can bear both meanings, or probably not simultaneously, but both meanings are an option. So a couple of comments a couple of more comments on verse 1. It says, behold, the Lord will empty the earth and make it desolate. This is reminiscent, I don't have it in the notes, but it is reminiscent of, and the earth was without form and void. It is reminiscent of prior to creation language. And so this would be hinting at new creation. God's going to wipe this out and start again. And says, the Lord will make it desolate. He will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. The scattering sounds like it could be talking about Babel, for instance, Genesis 11:8. So the Lord dispersed or scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. City is going to be important in Isaiah 24 to 27. This is this then would have two links to the entire section. They stopped building the city. God's going to destroy the city. In fact, I think there are actually three different cities being talked of in Isaiah 24 to 27. There's going to be the city of Jerusalem, the old Jerusalem, which is basically apostate and gets destroyed. And then there is the city of our God, which is the New Jerusalem. We have a strong, secure city, the New Jerusalem. And then there's the city of the foreigners, which is the city of the world, or it's representative of Assyria and Babylon and Egypt and all the enemies of God's people. So you have city being talked about, that city as the metaphor for describing the community of people, either apostate or enemy or redeemed. And what the Isaiah 24 to 27, in reference to those cities, the story is God destroys the other two cities, and the only city at the end of the world is God's city. That's the only one that's left. He's going to dominate. One he destroys in judgment because of its apostasy. The other he destroys or overcomes because of its hostility. But at the end of the day, it is only the holy city that is left. The other passage that is relevant here is Leviticus 26:33. And I will scatter you among the nations, and I will unsheathe the sword after you, and your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste. This is Isaiah 24:1. Behold, the Lord will empty the earth, make it desolate. Leviticus 23 or 26:33, desolation. The Lord will empty the Eretz in Isaiah 24. He will empty the Eretz and make it desolate, and he will twist the surface and scatter its inhabitants. Leviticus, I will scatter you among the nations. I will unsheath the sword after you, and your Eretz shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste. So I think that that's a very there's three different words there that are, and the idea, of course, is the same, but there's three different words that are the same too being used there, creating a really secure link between these two passages. And Leviticus 26, as we all know, is about the covenant curses at this point. It's the covenant curses for the breaking of the covenant. And so that would accord again then with verse 5. About the breaking of the covenant being the reason for this judgment. And what is the judgment? Well, the land is made desolate and the people are scattered. And that's the judgment of Leviticus that comes upon the people. So that's Isaiah 42, or I'm sorry, Isaiah 24:1. In verse 2, this is I don't even know how to say those words. I think it's a merism is the right way to say that. MERISM. It is a form of speaking or writing in which the totality of something is expressed by contrasting its parts. He went from the east to the west. Well, he went everywhere. That's what that means. From the highest to the lowest. A to Z. I know that subject. A to Z. It's just expressing the polar points, and it expresses everything in between. That's what's happening in verse 2. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. And that list could go on and on. Could name everybody, right, and all of their occupation, but it's not necessary to name everybody, because this is a form of speech which says this judgment will affect everybody. Doesn't matter what your position is, who you are, what your relationships are. The totality of this judgment that's coming. Now, again, the judgment isn't going to end in the death of everybody. So this is not the final judgment. It's going to end in scattering, right? And there will be a remnant. Some people will be killed in this judgment, but there will be a remnant, and they will be scattered. So this is not final judgment. Despite the earth shall, verse 3, the earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word. Now that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you are trying to maintain that this is about, the entire world, because it's not empty. There's people scattered, and it is the land that gets emptied. The land that gets emptied. And I think the land is in view here in all of these passages. So there's kind of an inclusion there, right? Verse 1 talked about making the earth empty and desolate, and then those ideas are brought up again in verse 3. Verse 4, the reason for the judgment is given. Verse 4, the earth mourns and withers, the world languishes and withers. The highest people of the earth languish. Languish here means grow weak. The earth is defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. Okay, so not everybody was wiped out. Few left there. So about languishing, let's look at Hosea 4, verses 1 through 3. Oh, I don't have it on my, should have been on the Hosea 4, 1 to 3. Hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. I said this was about languishing, but it's actually about breaking the covenant. There is no faithfulness or steadfast love and no knowledge of God in the land. So that word there is Eretz, also the land, Eretz, earth. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish, and also the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, and even the fish of the sea are taken away. So very similar in presentation there, except here in Hosea, the translators make it really clear that it's about Israel. In Isaiah 24, it's a little more complicated because of the setting of Isaiah 24 right after the judgments on the oracles against all of the nations. And because Isaiah 24 to 27 does include judgment on those nations again. So that's interesting. So the earth, obviously, or the people, the world is being personified. And let's see. So verse 5 talked about the reason for the judgment. I already talked a bit about that, but I want to look at some of the passages. I'm going to pass over the Romans passage. We're going to look at what defiles the land. What is it that defiles the land? So in Numbers 35, 33 to 34, you shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. Psalm 106:38. So that was murder, right? And Psalm 106:38. They poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Sacrificing to idols. Jeremiah 3, 1 through 9. If a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's wife, will he return to her? Would not that land be greatly polluted? So Deuteronomy 24 says, if a man divorces his wife and then she gets remarried and then she gets divorced again, that the first husband can't remarry her. That's the law that's being talked about. Would not that land be greatly polluted? You have played the whore with many lovers, and would you return to me? Declares the Lord. Lift up your eyes to the bare heights and see. Where have you not been ravished? By the waysides you have sat awaiting lovers like an Arab in the wilderness. You have polluted the land with your vile whoredom. Therefore the showers have been withheld and the spring rain has not come, yet you have the forehead of a whore. You refuse to be ashamed. Have you not just now called to me, my father? You are the friend of my youth. Will he be angry forever? Will he be indignant to the end? Behold, you have spoken, but you have done all the evil that you could. The Lord said to me in the days of King Josiah, have you seen what she did, the faithless one, Israel, how she went up on every high hill and under every green tree and played the whore there? And I thought, after she has done all this, she will return to me, but she did not return. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. She saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the whore. Because she took her whoredom lightly, she polluted the land, committing adultery with stone and tree. So spiritual infidelity, spiritual adultery, unfaithfulness pollutes the land. And then Leviticus 18:24-28. This is a command given to the people of Israel, the generation that's going to go into Canaan. Don't be like them. Uh, this is a command for them. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, that is, the things the nations do. For by all these, the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. You shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all of these abominations, so that the land became unclean, lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. But when we get to Isaiah's day, they've been doing these things, and the Lord is now threatening. He's reminding them of these passages, particularly the Leviticus passage, and saying, I'm about to expel you from the land. You've defiled it. I'm going to expel you and scatter you, as we read in Leviticus 26. And I do want to say that chapters, because of their sin needs to be taken care of, right? Not just the spewing out of the land. That doesn't take care of their sin. That's something where God shows his holiness, right? By by spewing them out of the land. But uh, their sin still needs to be taken care of. And we see that in verse 24, chapter 24 of Isaiah, verse 5. And then again at the end of this section in Isaiah 27:9. So we see the need for it here, the taking care of sin or atonement, because the earth lies defiled under its inhabitants. They've transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. If there is no atonement, then the only thing left is death, right? The complete annihilation and destruction of God's people. There must be atonement. And that's implied here, right? Because these are God's people. It's implied that there will be atonement. If you look at 27, verse 9, therefore by this the guilt of Jacob will be atoned for. What is this? Well, the spewing out of the land, the taking into exile, the living apart from the land and apart from their God, and their place of worship, and being basically a people with no identity. They've got no home, they've got no temple, they're just people know. So, and then the Lord delivers them by his own word out of the land, out of the land of the enemies, from the ends of the earth. He brings them back. And it says, therefore, by this, the guilt of Jacob will be atoned for, and this will be the full fruit of the removal of his sin. So how will we know that God has atoned his people? This is how. When the people make all the stones of the altars like chalk stones crushed to pieces, no Asherim or incense altars will remain standing. When they're no longer idolaters, when they don't play spiritual harlotry anymore. This is the atonement. This is the fruit of the atonement. The atonement is they are made God's people. And I think, we already read in chapter 24, one verse that said God's going to destroy this city and it will never be rebuilt. Well, and I've been arguing that this land is Israel, and you all know the city of Jerusalem was rebuilt. So what could that possibly mean? How could I still maintain that? I maintain it this way. It was the rebellious apostate city that was destroyed. And the new Jerusalem that is built, there's a physical city that is built, but the new Jerusalem that's built in Isaiah is the city of God. And when later on he's going to judge the enemies, he's going to call them a city too, and he's going to say that city will never be rebuilt. What does he mean? He means that God's people will no longer be under the authority of false gods and false uh, the nations, basically. That even though we live in the world, we're not of the world, but we are part of his, we are citizens of his heavenly kingdom, of the New Jerusalem. And so those former things which basically terrorized and enslaved God's people are no longer, uh, they no longer have that power. And so, yes, there is a city arrayed against God, but it doesn't have the same power over God's people as it did before. And yes, there is an apostate Jerusalem, but it isn't contaminating God's true people who are the New Jerusalem. So I think that helps explain that. In We'll move into the covenant question, which covenant I mentioned what I thought, but we'll look at the passages. So in Isaiah 24:6, right, it talks about, or 24:5, at the end, they've broken the everlasting covenant. What covenant is that? What covenant is that? So the two options I said are Noah and Abraham. Here's the language from Genesis 9:16. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. Uh, Now, earth there means earth because there was no talking about the promised land for a while. So, but it's still the same word. And people who understand Isaiah 24 to be talking about judgment on the world, on the earth, they will trace the everlasting covenant back to Noah. They'll say, here it is. God's made an everlasting covenant between God and every living creature in the earth. And so this God's covenant is with mankind. But that covenant was that God would not destroy the earth by flood. There was no law or anything for them to violate. Right? Am I wrong about that? I think that's correct. But with Noah, there was no. When the text in Isaiah 24 says they violated the covenant, well, how could they violate it? The covenant is completely about God. He says, I won't do this again. Um, but in Genesis 17:7, the phrase everlasting covenant comes up again. I will establish my covenant between you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. So God says, I'm going to establish this covenant with you and your offspring. It's going to be established, and it is the everlasting covenant. I'll be your God, and the God to you and to your offspring after you. And this covenant has to do, is intimately related to a covenant that does have laws, right? It's the Mosaic covenant, which is not a different covenant from this, but just an expansion or clarification of what God is saying to Abraham. And so the laws that they're violating, or the violation of the covenant, is they have not been the people of God. The full covenant is, you will be my people, I will be your God, and I will dwell with you. And the people committed all kinds of sins, spiritual adultery being foremost, which basically breaks the covenant. If you think of the marriage contract, the reason that that divorce is allowed, but it's not the only, it's not a good option. It's not the best option, but it is allowed by the Lord as a concession, is because adultery basically has broken the covenant. And so I think that's what's happening there. We're referring to the covenant uh, that is made. The difference between, say, Moses and Noah is Noah is seen and understood as representing pretty much all of humanity. He's the new man, the new Adam. But Abraham is the father of Israel. So we have a focusing of God's covenant favor in Abraham. So that's what's going on there, I think. Isaiah 24:6 Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are scorched, and few men are left. So the breaking of the covenant brings the curse. That we all know that. Um, Genesis 3:17-19 is the first breaking of the law and God's response. And he said to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. So the disobedience brings the curse. Paul talks about that in Romans 8:18-25. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. I read this passage because the earth is subjected to futility. It is under the curse until God sets it free. And why is it under the curse? Not because of something the earth did, not by the earth's own will, but because something Adam did, and he was basically the in a creaturely way, he was the representative of God as the ruler on earth. And so what Adam does affects everything, not just us. And when God reverses that work of Adam finally, then the curse will be lifted. But curse comes from disobedience. And that was just the basic point there. Um, and then there's a reference there that the curse devours, right? 24:6, the first line. Therefore, a curse devours the earth. So the curse is like a wild animal, um, like something like that. You see it at Malachi 3:11. I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it will not destroy the fruits of your soil, and your vine in the field shall not fail to bear, says the Lord of hosts. The devourer, what could be locusts, could be anything, but it's the God's judgment coming upon them is in the form of devouring their produce. Deuteronomy 31:16-18 says, and the Lord said to Moses, behold, you are about to lie down with your fathers. Then this people will rise and whore after the foreign gods among them in the land that they are entering, and they will forsake me and break my covenant that I have made with them. Then my anger will be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them and hide my face from them, and they will be devoured. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, right? And many evils and troubles will come upon them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil they have done, because they have turned to other gods. So what's happening in Isaiah is it's all right there in what Moses just said, that what the Lord said to Moses, that he's going to put them in the land. They're going to commit spiritual adultery with all the idols in the land. They're going to become just like the Canaanites. God's going to have to spew them out of the land. They're going to go into exile. And in exile, they're going to say, these things happen to us because God's not with us. Deuteronomy 32:12. Why did I have that there? Hmm. Let me just look at Deuteronomy 32. Hmm. Hmm. 1 sec. It's actually 22. Deuteronomy 32:22. The Lord says, "For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours the earth and its increase, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountain." Yeah. I think we have just a few more minutes, so I want to read a little bit more, maybe verse 10. Start Deuteronomy 32, verse 9. Deuteronomy 32, verse 9. The Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness he encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. The Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field, and he suckled him with honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herd, and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan, and goats, with the very finest of the wheat, and he drank foaming wine from the blood of the grape. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with foreign gods, with strange gods, with abominations. They provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were not God, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters, and he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom there is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours to the earth and its increase, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. So the context of verse 22 is the people have been put in the land. They have then committed all kinds of abominations, pretty much the whole list of what they could do to defile the land. They've done it, and they've forgotten the Lord. And now the Lord is provoked in anger against them, and he is going to send against them a foreign nation. They're not his people. He's going to send not his people against them. And it's in that context of the other peoples, the foreigners coming to judge his people, that he says, I'm going to devour the earth, which is the same context in Isaiah 24. And then to continue in Deuteronomy 32:23. I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the sword shall bereave, and indoor terror for young man and woman alike, the nurse and child with the man of gray hairs. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory, had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did all this. For they are a nation void of counsel. There is no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. All right. So the Deuteronomy passage is predictive in what's going to happen to the people of Israel after Moses dies. And it is this kind of pattern of events, this template, which you should use to read Isaiah 24 to 27. because that's the backdrop. That's what's going on. It is now at the time where they're about to be spewed out of the land and then go into a terrible time when disaster comes upon them and God is silent. And they say, it's because God's not with us. Right. um, so that's what's going on there, I think. Um, so that's we've run out of time, and I think I've come to a good place to stop for 2 weeks. Next week we aren't meeting. Does any of you have anything you want to add to this, or any comment or question?
So,
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn off the recording.